The Mafia Boss saw the Black Maid sew a torn toy quietly and realized whose name she whispered. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to Victor Hale. Victor Hale had built his life on precision, on knowing every sound that belonged in his house and every shadow that did not, which was why the faint scrape of a chair at nearly midnight drew his attention as he crossed the west corridor of the estate, a place usually silent after the last lights were dimmed. He slowed without thinking, shoes quiet on polished wood, and noticed a soft glow spilling from the laundry room, door left ajar. Inside, Naomi Brooks sat on a low stool with her shoulders rounded inward, as if trying to take up less space in a room already too large for her presence. A small lamp angled over her hands. She was sewing, not with haste, not with the efficiency expected of staff paid by the hour, but carefully, patiently, guiding a needle through worn fabric as though time itself had agreed to wait. In her lap rested a stuffed bear. It seemed torn along the side, cotton peeking out like a secret meant to stay hidden. Victor recognized the toy instantly. It belonged to Ethan. His son rarely asked for anything, rarely spoke at all since the loss that had hollowed their home years earlier, but he carried that bear everywhere, dragging it along hallways measured in feet rather than miles, clinging to it on nights when sleep refused to come. Naomi had no reason to be here. Repair requests went through management. New toys could be ordered overnight, shipped with a click, replaced without thought. Yet she stitched anyway, fingers steady despite the late hour, her breathing even, the hum of the dryer providing a gentle rhythm. Victor remained in the darkened hall, unseen, something he had mastered long before power learned his name, and watched as Naomi paused to knot the thread. She leaned closer. To the bear, her voice barely a breath, the kind meant for no one, the kind spoken only when a heart believes it is alone. It's okay, she whispered, soothing, intimate, a promise tucked into sound. Then, softer still, a name slipped free, a name Victor had not heard spoken aloud in years, a name not meant for Ethan at all. The syllables settled into the room and into Victor's chest with equal weight. He did not step forward. He did not clear his throat or announce himself. He simply stood there, a man accustomed to command rendered motionless by a moment that asked nothing of him and offered no escape. As Naomi tied the final knot, smoothed the seam with her thumb, and cradled the mended toy as if it were something alive, something worth saving. By morning, the house returned to its practiced rhythm, the kind measured in quiet footsteps and scheduled tasks, and Naomi Brooks moved through it the way she always did, careful, efficient, unseen. She rose before sunrise, tied her hair back, and folded herself into the routines that paid the bills and asked no questions. In the kitchen, stainless steel gleamed under warm lights. Coffee brewed at exactly 6 o'clock, and the smell of toast drifted down a hallway that led to rooms she cleaned but never claimed. Naomi had learned the geography of the estate in inches and minutes, which doors stayed closed, which corners echoed, which floors creaked if stepped on too fast. She had also learned where grief settled, how it lingered in places people avoided, how it pressed itself into objects left untouched. Ethan's room was one of those places. She entered only when assigned, keeping her movements small, her presence gentle. That morning, she placed the repaired bear on the edge of the bed where the sheets were smooth and cool, arranging it so the seam faced the mattress, invisible to a child who would notice everything if given the chance. Ethan watched from the doorway, his frame slight, his eyes alert in a way that made adults speak softer without knowing why. He did not smile, but he reached out, took the bear, and held it against his chest as if testing whether it would come apart again. It did not. Naomi nodded once, a habit more than a gesture, and backed away. Down the hall, Victor Hale stood in his study with a cup of coffee he did not drink, the events of the night replaying with a clarity that unsettled him. He prided himself on control, on memory that cataloged facts without emotion, yet the sound of that whispered name refused to fade. It had threaded itself into the morning like a song heard through a wall, faint but insistent. He opened a drawer and closed it again, then opened a different one, searching for a document he did not need, simply to feel the comfort of paper and order. From the window, he could see the ground stretching out in clean lines, measured and maintained, a world that obeyed schedules. Naomi crossed the lawn below with a basket of folded linens balanced on her hip, her pace unhurried, her gaze down. She looked like someone who had learned to move through life without disturbing it, and the realization pressed on Victor with unexpected weight. He thought of reports signed years ago, of brief summaries that reduced lives to dates and costs, of names that appeared once and never again. He thought of how easily silence could be mistaken for absence. In the afternoon, when Ethan refused his lesson and retreated to the window seat, Victor approached, lowering himself to the floor without instruction or impatience. The bear lay between them, thread neat and strong. Ethan traced the seam with his finger, then leaned his head against his father's shoulder. It was a small thing, the kind that could be dismissed as coincidence, but Victor felt it register, felt the house shift by a fraction of an inch. Later, he called for Naomi, not with urgency, not with authority sharpened to an edge, but with a tone that surprised them both. She stood straight in his doorway, hands folded, eyes steady. He thanked her for her work. Nothing more. No explanation. No questions. Naomi nodded, accepting the words as they were offered, and returned to her duties, leaving behind a room that felt, for the first time in years, less heavy than before. The days that followed settled into a quieter pattern, the kind that revealed more by what it did not say. Naomi Brooks continued her work with the same restraint she had always practiced, her presence marked by finished tasks rather than footsteps. Yet Victor Hale found himself noticing the intervals she occupied, the way order appeared behind her and remained. He began to see how the house responded to her care, how surfaces stayed warmer, how rooms felt lived in without being disturbed. In Ethan's routine, small changes took root. The boy carried the mended bear from room to room, setting it down with intention, placing it near windows and chairs as if it belonged there. At night, when the hall lights dimmed, Victor paused outside his son's door and listened, not for noise, but for absence. The crying that once punctured the hours no longer came. Instead, there was a hush that felt earned. Victor returned to his study and opened a folder he had not touched in years, its edges softened by time. Inside were records, addresses, dates, and a single name that had resurfaced like a stone breaking water. He read without haste, letting the details arrive as they were written, noting how brief the margins were, how final the language sounded. The file did not tell a story. It ended one. He closed it and set it aside, understanding, perhaps for the first time, the cost of reducing lives to lines. Later that afternoon, rain moved in, light at first, then steady, tapping against glass measured in inches and seconds. Naomi adjusted schedules, brought towels where they were needed, and kept to her path. Victor watched from the window as she crossed the courtyard with her coat pulled tight, moving as though she expected the weather to test her resolve. When she returned inside, she paused near the stairs and looked up, her gaze lifting toward a framed photograph she had dusted countless times. It showed Ethan as a baby, held by a woman whose smile reached beyond the frame. Naomi's eyes lingered for a breath. Then she lowered them and continued on. That evening, Victor joined Ethan on the floor with a puzzle spread between them. Pieces clicked together slowly, patience required. When Ethan hesitated, Victor waited. The bear sat nearby, propped against a cushion, it seemed still and visible. Ethan placed a final piece and looked up, his eyes meeting his father's with a clarity that startled them both. He did not speak, but he leaned closer, resting his shoulder against Victor's arm. The weight was slight, but it anchored him. Later, as the house prepared for night, Victor called for Naomi again. She entered with the same composure, her posture respectful, her expression open. He asked her how long she had been sewing. The question was ordinary, almost clumsy. Naomi answered plainly, saying she learned when she was young, that mending kept things useful, that it felt right. Victor nodded, absorbing the simplicity of it. He did not ask about names. He did not ask about loss. He thanked her once more, his voice steady, and told her she could take the next morning off. Naomi paused, surprised, then accepted without comment. As she left, Victor understood that some truths did not need to be spoken to be honored. In the quiet that followed, he stood alone and felt the house breathe. A slow, careful rhythm that suggested repair was not always visible, but it was real. Morning light arrived muted by clouds, the kind that softened edges and slowed the pace of decisions, and Victor Hale found himself awake before the house stirred, seated at the kitchen table with a legal pad he had not used in years. He wrote nothing at first, only drew a line down the center, as if dividing what had been from what could still change. The quiet invited honesty. He thought about how power had trained him to move quickly, to finish matters cleanly, to avoid lingering where emotions gathered. Yet the days since the sewing had asked him to linger, to watch rather than direct. Naomi Brooks returned later than usual, her approved morning off leaving a faint gap in the schedule that Victor noticed without checking the clock. When she arrived, she carried herself the same way, composed, respectful, ready to work. She did not thank him for the time. She simply resumed, and that restraint struck him as a discipline he did not possess. As the morning unfolded, Victor chose to walk the house without agenda, noting details he once delegated. The weight of doors, the smell of polish, the way sunlight fell across the hall near the stairs. In Ethan's room, the boy sat on the rug with the bear beside him, lining up blocks by color and height. Victor sat nearby, close enough to share space without interrupting it. Ethan placed a block, paused, then handed another to his father. Victor accepted, building slowly, learning the patience his son required. In the corridor, Naomi paused, unseen, long enough to ensure the moment held, then continued. On. Later, Victor asked the house manager to update a few routines, nothing dramatic, just allowances that favored care over speed. He requested higher quality thread and mending supplies be stocked, quietly, without explanation. When the rain returned, lighter now, Naomi adjusted the windows and set a kettle on low heat, the kind of instinct that anticipated comfort without asking for permission. Victor joined her in the kitchen, not to supervise, but to occupy the same space. He asked where she was from. She answered with a city name and a short smile that carried history without offering it. He did not pry. He told her the house felt different lately. She nodded, as if acknowledging a shared observation rather than accepting credit. In the afternoon, Victor opened his calendar and canceled a meeting that no longer felt urgent. He used the time to sit with Ethan and read aloud, his voice steady, the words filling the room like a bridge. Ethan leaned in, the bear tucked beneath his arm, fingers tracing the seam again. That night, after the lights dimmed, Victor stood by the window and watched Naomi leave, her figure receding down the drive measured in feet and seconds until it disappeared. He realized then that repair was not an event but a practice, something done quietly, consistently, often without witnesses. In his study, he tore the legal pad page in half, folded the blank side into his pocket, and resolved to keep it there, a reminder that some lines were meant to be crossed not with force, but with care. The following week carried a sense of decision that did not announce itself, moving through the house in subtle adjustments rather than declarations. Victor Hale felt it in the way his mornings began earlier, not from urgency, but from intent, and in how his evenings ended with fewer unanswered thoughts. He noticed that Ethan no longer hovered at the edges of rooms, that he chose spaces with windows and light, that he slept with the bear tucked close and woke without distress. Victor began to understand that care, when sustained, changed the shape of days. Naomi Brooks continued her work with the same measured calm, yet Victor perceived a difference in how others responded to her, how requests softened, how time allowed itself to be taken. Without calling attention to it, he made choices that protected her. Quiet, adjusting assignments so she was not rushed, ensuring her hours reflected trust rather than oversight. One afternoon, he asked her to sit in the living room while he spoke with Ethan nearby, a simple invitation that respected boundaries. Naomi accepted, hands folded, posture composed, her presence grounding rather than intrusive. Ethan brought the bear to her, placing it on her knee as if returning something precious for safekeeping. Naomi smiled, small and sincere, and smoothed the fabric where the seam held firm. Victor watched the exchange with a clarity that surprised him, recognizing that influence did not always arrive with authority. Later, alone in his study, he reviewed household policies he had approved years ago, marking changes with deliberate care, rewriting expectations to prioritize stability. He made calls that shifted priorities, choosing outcomes that favored continuity over speed, clarity over convenience. None of it felt dramatic, yet each choice carried weight. As evening settled, rain giving way to a cool hush, Victor joined Ethan at the dining table for dinner, serving portions measured in patience rather than minutes. Ethan ate steadily, listening as Victor spoke about the day in simple terms, modeling the steadiness he hoped to pass on. Afterward, Victor walked the halls, pausing by framed photographs, acknowledging faces with a gentleness that had once felt foreign. He stopped outside the laundry room, now tidy and quiet, and remembered the night he had stood unseen, learning that repair could begin with a whisper. The next morning, Victor called Naomi into his study, not to interrogate, not to revisit what was unspoken, but to offer her a formal adjustment to her role, one that recognized her skill and judgment. He explained it plainly, without flourish, leaving space for her consent. Naomi listened, asked one practical question, and agreed. Her acceptance was not gratitude but partnership, and Victor respected it as such. When she left, he felt the house settle again, a fraction lighter, a fraction more honest. In the afternoon, Ethan brought Victor the bear and pointed to the seam, then to his chest, then to Naomi across the room. Victor understood the language of the moment and nodded. He realized then that some lessons did not require words, only the courage to notice and the discipline to act quietly. As the day closed, Victor placed a new legal pad on his desk and wrote a single line, not a division, but a reminder that repair begins when power listens and dignity is allowed to remain whole. As the days progressed, the house adjusted to its new equilibrium, not through grand announcements, but through consistency that proved itself reliable. Victor Hale observed how predictability offered comfort, especially to Ethan, whose routines now unfolded with fewer hesitations. Breakfast arrived warm and unhurried. Afternoons carried space for rest, and evenings closed with stories read aloud in a steady voice. Victor found himself measuring success not by outcomes, but by continuity, by the absence of strain. Naomi Brooks moved within this structure as a stabilizing presence, her decisions guided by attention rather than instruction. She noticed when Ethan needed quiet, and when he sought proximity, when the bear belonged on the bed, and when it belonged on the windowsill where light pooled in late afternoon. Victor watched without intervening, learning the value of restraint. One evening, as dusk settled and the temperature dropped by several degrees, Naomi brought an extra blanket to the living room without being asked, draping it over the chair where Ethan often sat. Ethan wrapped himself in it and leaned against his father, the bear pressed between them, and Victor felt the simplicity of the moment anchor him. Later that night, Victor reviewed correspondence that once would have demanded immediate action. He chose patience instead, postponing decisions that could wait, prioritizing those that protected stability. He recognized that leadership could be quiet, that authority could be expressed through care rather than command. The following morning, he invited Naomi to share a brief update on Ethan's preferences, framing it as collaboration rather than oversight. She spoke plainly, noting small details, times of day, textures, sounds. Victor listened, writing nothing, committing it to memory. In the afternoon, he rearranged his schedule to be present, choosing to sit with Ethan during a brief lesson, allowing Naomi to guide the pace. When Ethan grew restless, Victor waited. When Ethan returned, Victor smiled. The bear remained nearby, its seam intact, a silent testament to repair done right. As the week ended, Victor stood at the edge of the property and watched the sun dip below the trees, measuring the quiet in minutes and breaths. He thought of how easily he once dismissed such moments, how he had equated motion with progress. Now, stillness taught him more. That evening, he thanked Naomi again, not for a single act, but for the standards she upheld daily. She accepted the acknowledgement with a nod, neither deflecting nor embellishing it. In the quiet that followed, Victor understood that transformation did not require spectacle. It required attention, consistency, and the humility to learn from what was already working. As he tucked Ethan into bed, smoothing the blanket and setting the bear within reach, Victor felt a sense of completion that did not close a chapter but prepared the next one, confident that repair, when honored, could endure. The shift became undeniable not because of what changed in policy, but because of what softened in posture. Victor Hale noticed it first in himself, in the way he no longer filled silence with instruction, in how he allowed moments to resolve without pressure. The house mirrored that restraint. Staff moved with confidence rather than caution, schedules held without tension, and Ethan's days unfolded with a steadiness that suggested trust had taken root. Naomi Brooks remained consistent. Her presence neither expanded nor diminished by the adjustments around her. She continued to notice details others missed, the angle of light that calmed Ethan, the textures he avoided, the cadence that allowed him to transition without distress. Victor began to rely on her observations without formalizing them, understanding that codifying care could diminish it. One afternoon, a delivery arrived with new supplies, including thread and fabric of higher quality than before. Naomi organized them with care, labeling drawers, setting aside pieces for future mending. Victor watched from a distance and recognized the intention behind preparation, the respect for continuity. That evening, as temperatures dipped and a breeze moved through open windows, Ethan sat beside Naomi on the living room rug, the bear between them. He traced the seam again, then looked up at her, searching her face. Naomi met his gaze and nodded, offering reassurance without words. Victor felt the moment land, not as revelation, but as confirmation. Later, Victor opened a notebook and listed commitments that extended beyond the house, choosing partners and timelines that aligned with stability rather than speed. He declined invitations that promised attention without purpose, selecting instead paths that would preserve the quiet progress already underway. He understood that restraint could be strategic, that care could be a form of leadership. The next morning, he asked Naomi if she would be willing to guide a brief orientation for new staff regarding the household's routines, emphasizing preferences and sensitivities rather than rules. She considered, then agreed, stipulating that it remained practical and respectful. Victor accepted her terms without negotiation. The session that followed was brief and effective, grounded in observation and empathy. Ethan watched from the doorway, holding the bear close, and when it ended, he approached Naomi and placed the bear in her hands, then returned it to his own chest. The exchange was simple, complete. As dusk settled, Victor walked the grounds, measuring distance in steps and breaths, aware of how easily order could return to rigidity if left unchecked. He resolved to keep listening. That night, he sat with Ethan and spoke about tomorrow, outlining plans in clear, calm language, offering predictability without confinement. Ethan listened, leaned in, and rested his head against Victor's shoulder. The bear lay between them. It seemed strong. In the quiet that followed, Victor understood that justice did not always arrive with correction or consequence. Sometimes it arrived as protection, as continuity, as the decision to honor what worked and let it lead. He looked toward the hallway where Naomi's careful steps had passed countless times and recognized that dignity, once seen, carried an obligation to be preserved. The weekend arrived with clear skies and a cooler breeze, the kind that sharpened attention and invited reflection, and Victor Hale chose to keep the day unstructured, allowing the house to reveal what it needed. Ethan woke early and padded into the kitchen, the bear tucked beneath his arm, where Naomi Brooks was already preparing breakfast with measured care. She greeted him softly, offering choices without pressure, and Ethan responded by setting the bear on the counter, watching closely as Naomi moved. Victor observed from the doorway, noting how routine could feel like freedom when it respected boundaries. After breakfast, Victor suggested a walk on the grounds, a simple proposal framed with certainty and calm. Ethan nodded, pulling on his jacket with Naomi's quiet assistance. Outside, the paths curved gently, measured in yards and minutes, leaves shifting underfoot. Ethan walked between Victor and Naomi, occasionally stopping to point at something small, a stone, a bird, the way light touched a branch. Victor waited, letting curiosity set the pace. At a bench near the pond, they sat together, the bear placed carefully between them. Naomi adjusted Ethan's collar against the breeze, her movements precise and respectful. Victor felt the scene settle into him, a picture not staged, not declared, simply earned. Later, back inside, Victor reviewed a letter he had drafted and revised twice, then folded it away. It outlined commitments to stability, support for those who worked within his household, provisions that ensured dignity without spectacle. He understood that permanence mattered more than praise. In the afternoon, Ethan asked for Naomi by name, a request he had never voiced before. Victor called for her without hesitation. She joined them in the living room, sitting at a comfortable distance as Victor read aloud. Ethan listened, then leaned closer, resting his head against Victor's arm. Naomi watched, present without intruding, and Victor felt gratitude for the discipline that allowed such moments to exist. As evening approached, Victor invited Naomi to share a meal with them, framing it as convenience rather than exception. She agreed, and the three sat together, the bear occupying its place near Ethan's plate. Conversation remained simple, grounded in the day's observations. Afterward, Victor walked Naomi to the door, thanking her for the steadiness she brought. She acknowledged the words and stepped into the night, her silhouette receding down the drive. Victor returned inside and found Ethan waiting, the bear in his hands. Ethan held it out, then placed it on Victor's desk, as if assigning it a role. Victor smiled, understanding the trust implied. He lifted the bear and set it within reach, smoothing the fabric where the seam held strong. That night, as the house quieted, Victor sat alone and considered how far the change had traveled without ever announcing itself. There had been no confrontation, no declarations, only attention sustained and care respected. He recognized that justice, in its quietest form, was the choice to protect what healed, to allow dignity to guide decisions, and to ensure that what was repaired remained whole. He turned off the light, confident that the morning would arrive with the same calm it had earned. The final change revealed itself not as an ending, but as a steadiness that no longer needed attention to sustain it. Weeks passed, marked by mornings that began without haste and evenings that closed with calm, and Victor Hale understood that what had shifted was not the house alone, but the way he occupied it. Ethan moved with confidence through familiar rooms, choosing where to sit, when to listen, when to rest. The bear remained a constant. It seemed strong, its presence trusted. Naomi Brooks continued her work with the same discipline that had always defined her, yet the respect surrounding her no longer felt provisional. It had settled into policy, into habit, into the unspoken agreement that care deserved room to work. One afternoon, Victor invited Naomi into his study, not to revisit the past, but to confirm the future. He explained that her role would remain as it was, supported and protected, with schedules that honored her judgment and resources that recognized her skill. He spoke plainly, without sentiment, because clarity felt like respect. Naomi listened, nodded, and accepted, her expression steady. She did not ask for recognition. She did not offer a story. The agreement stood on its own. Later that day, Victor found Ethan at the window, sunlight catching the dust in the air like a quiet promise. Ethan held the bear out, then set it on the sill, arranging it so it faced the light. Victor joined him, shoulder to shoulder, sharing the view measured in yards and minutes. The moment did not ask to be named. As evening arrived, Victor walked the halls one last time, pausing where the laundry room light once glowed, where a small act had changed the direction of a household. He did not step inside. He did not need to. In the living room, Naomi prepared to leave, gathering her coat. Victor thanked her, not with emphasis, but with certainty. She met his gaze, acknowledged the words, and turned toward the door. Ethan followed, the bear in his arms. He stopped, placed the bear briefly in Naomi's hands, then took it back and leaned into Victor's side. Naomi smiled, a quiet curve that held both memory and resolve, and stepped into the night. Victor watched until the drive cleared, then returned inside. He tucked Ethan into bed, smoothing the blanket, setting the bear within reach, and dimmed the light to a level that felt safe. Ethan closed his eyes, breathing even, settled. Victor remained for a moment, listening to the silence that no longer felt empty. In his study, he closed a drawer that held old files and left it closed. He turned off the lamp and stood in the dark, aware that power had not been diminished by restraint, that authority had not weakened by listening. It had been refined. As the house rested, Victor understood the lesson he would carry forward, not as a declaration but as a practice. Dignity is preserved by attention, repair is sustained by consistency, and justice, at its quietest, is the decision to protect what heals. And in that understanding, The house held its breath and then released it, whole.